Julie Bearer. I'm on the board of the Center for Fiction. I'm one of your co-hosts this evening with Pilar Queen. And I want to thank all of you for coming tonight and thank our amazing committee members for helping make tonight happen and our amazing writers for writing such wonderful books. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Center for Fiction and the First Novel Prize, and then you're going to hear from these amazingly talented writers, and then we're going to get our drink on. I hope by now most of you know about the Center for Fiction and all of the wonderful things that we do here. If you don't, I hope after this evening you will want to become a member and consider attending one of the 100 events that you can do here at the Center for Fiction. That's workshops, readings, panels with authors, translators, critics. There's a lot of amazing events. There's an incredible library. There's our fabulous Emerging Fellows program. I hope they are here this evening. That's a great fellowship that gives both time and money and opportunity to emerging fellows. They get to meet with agents and editors. One of the things that I think the Center for Fiction considers its sort of place in the world is helping both grow and foster readers and writers. So that's a lot of the things that we do here hopefully serve both those purposes. The tickets that you thankfully purchased tonight go to benefit two of our wonderful programs, and that's Books for New York City Schools and our KidsRead program. Through those, we're able to donate 35,000 books to kids in New York City schools, which I think is really awesome, and bring 400 kids from New York City schools here to the Center for Fiction to meet with authors of books that they are reading so they can see real live writers and see that that's a possible future for them and get them excited about books and about writing. And obviously one of the wonderful programs that we have at the Center for Fiction is what we're here to celebrate tonight, and that's the Flaherty-Dunnan First Novel Prize. And that was created by our board member Nancy Dunnan in honor of her father, Ray Flaherty, who was a great lover of fiction and literature. And sadly, we lost Nancy earlier this year, so this year the prize is in honor of her father and in honor of her. So I'm going to have our wonderful finalists get up and read, and I'm not going to introduce them, they'll just say their names and tell you who they are, read a little bit, and I hope after the reading you'll all be inspired to go downstairs, buy a copy of their books, and sign up and become a member of the Center for Fiction. Thank you.
Hello everyone, can you hear me okay? All right, awesome. Tell me if I'm too quiet. My name is Renee Denfeld. My debut novel was published by Harper. The incredible Gail Winston is my editor. This is the novel. In addition to a long history in journalism, for several years I've been a death penalty investigator. And this novel was largely inspired by my work with men and women who are facing execution. It's narrated by a man who is largely silent, who lives on death row in Oregon, where I happen to work. The fallen priest comes down the row. I can hear in his footsteps that he doesn't like what he has to do today. It has to do with Stryker. We can hear the meagerness in his voice, the near whisper as he gets close to the cell and asks to be admitted. The little men with hammers sit back on their haunches, deep in the walls, and listen. I hear the fear in Stryker's voice as he responds. It is the fear of a man that is about to meet his death. The doors clang open and the priest goes inside, accompanied by the guards. I hear Stryker weeping. The priest cannot administer last rites because he has fallen, but the soon-to-be dead do not care. Stryker asks the priest for a prayer, and I hear the priest's soft voice before I begin to fade into memories. I hear music in my head, which is funny, because it is a song that I have not remembered in many years. It is a song that played on Lawrence Welk when I was a child. I remember now. I was staying with my grandparents. They had a home by the bay out past the oyster beds. I must have been about 8. It was maybe a year before I was taken away from my mother. Isn't it funny how when you get older, some memories come back? That's happening more often to me lately, as if memories of the outside are returning, and it is this enchanted place that is the dream. I remember how the surf crashed against the wild, wet rocks, and how my grandparents had a little weather-beaten house on the shore. I can see my grandpa's red hands, scarred from fishing, I remember thinking that the sea was smoking from the wild spray it threw and the smell of the rocks. My grandpa had told me that seals bobbed in the waves, and so I stood for hours that day on the wet rocks, watching for them, thinking of their smooth, glossy brown fur, their plump bodies and large, wet eyes. That night my grandmother gave me a bath, weeping silently while she scrubbed me, and she dressed me in pajamas that stuck to my damp back. I sat in front of the little television, waiting for my favorite song from Lawrence Welk. It was a song at the end of the show that I loved, the goodbye song. I heard it now as Stryker wept. Isn't it funny how you remember? I remember my grandmother bringing me a mug of homemade hot chocolate, so hot the marshmallows seared my mouth, and a heel of fresh-baked white bread smeared with margarine. I ate my sweetie snack, and she took me to bed, and she tucked me in, and I listened as the surf crashed against the rock, hearing the sweetness of that goodbye song, as she and Grandpa talked in low voices in the room that was right next to mine. He could talk before Eldridge, she said. I know, Mother, I know, he responded. The next day I was wearing the same clothes I'd worn the day before, the only clothes I had, now washed and pressed, the faded orange pants 2 inches too short, and the shirt frayed at the buttonholes, and my grandmother's face was red with tears, and I was waiting to get picked up by my mother and her new boyfriend. No matter how much I knew it hurt my grandmother, my heart was bursting with hope, and I couldn't wait to dart out her door because I loved my mom and I always would. I know, I hear the priest saying now. The entire death row has fallen silent to listen. Is it too late, Stryker begs? The priest doesn't answer. His heart is pale with practice. He can no longer lie. God will tell you the answer, he says. The death row is quiet. On the other side of me, York sits in his cell and he listens, his hands quiet in his lap. I sit on my cot, the blanket over my head. This is the way it is every time, all the time. Other people have doors to shut, rooms to cross. Here we have no privacy. We are trapped, naked to one another all the time. Our doors must be fashioned out of desire, but maybe doors made of wishes are stronger than steel. The prayers are done. The priest rises, sweaty, feeling as always that he didn't do it right. God would like him better if he was better. Please, Lord, he thinks, let me be better. Stryker wipes his face. He hunts for a sense of forgiveness in himself, and he turns to the priest as the man shakes out his sweaty trousers. Is that all, he asks? The priest nods. Yes, that is all.
Wow, there's a lot of people here. I'm Smith Henderson. This is my book. It's called 4th of July Creek. Thank you for coming. It's an honor to be here. When you write a novel, a first novel, I think you mostly live in terror that you won't be able to write another one after that. All I can say is that being here tonight, with you guys, and with nominated for this prize by the Center for Fiction, it feels, I feel mostly relief. I'll get around to feeling happy after a couple of drinks, but right now it's like, oh, okay, cool, maybe I gotta write another one. My book's about a child protective services worker in Montana, where I'm from. The book's set in the 1980s, early 1980, and the social worker's name is Pete Snow, and he becomes consumed with all of his cases, but the one that becomes the most dire and fraught involves a family by the name of the Pearls, who live in the woods, and they seem to be led by their father towards a violent confrontation, which Pete is trying to avoid at all costs. But the section I'd like to share with you tonight is actually from another thread in the book, which is from Pete's personal life. As a person who deals with traumatic children all the time. He's suffering a lot of consequences in his personal life, and it's profoundly affected his wife and daughter. And so I wrote these sections about his daughter's journey in a Q&A format, which is a little different. We'll be all right. It's not going to be too weird. But if you hear questions, that's why. I think I'll just jump into it. All you need to know is that Pete's daughter's name is Rachel, and they're leaving Montana. What was it like on the way to Texas? It was Wyoming, which means to drive forever through ugly scrubscape, the color of dirty pennies. It was just Wyoming along. They were Wyoming forever. You could Wyoming all day and not make any progress. To Wyoming was to go from nowhere to nowhere, through nowhere, to see nothing, to do nothing but sit. You turn on the radio in Wyoming through the dial, slowly, carefully, in search of a sliver of civilization, only to find a man talking about the price of stock animals and feed. Did her mom Wyoming too? Mom Wyominged all through Colorado. She smoked. She drank coffee and tab and then beer, Wyoming her fingers on the wheel sometimes and stopping to Wyoming to someone on the payphone, maybe daddy, but probably that friend in Texas, the truck driver. So is he your boyfriend? It's an old friend, Rachel. An old friend from when? From when I worked at the trucking company. He's a trucker. So that's why we're going all the way to Texas. He said we could stay with him. What's his name? Jimmy. How do you know him? I told you from when I was a receptionist. So you did it with him too. What is that supposed to mean? Him too? Come on, I know why Daddy left. Did her mother hit her or pull over or give some kind of talking to her? Worse. What did she do? She cried, those big drops, just quiet, racing down her face. Did that bother Rachel? Yeah. Why? Because her mother's heart was Wyoming. It was Wyoming hard. And she was days and years and maybe forever from a good man. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you everybody for coming out tonight, and really honored to be here as well and to be nominated for this prize. My novel, well, first of all, I'm Vanessa Manco, and my novel is The Invention of Exile, published by the Penguin Press. And the book follows the life of a Russian immigrant named Austin Voronkov, who was deported from the US during the first wave of the Red Scare. And he eventually ends up living in exile in Mexico City, and he's cobbling together an existence as a repairman, and he, as an engineer and an inventor, he begins to think that his inventions are going to allow him to reunite with his family across the US-Mexico border because they are still in the US. So I'm just going to read from a section in Mexico City. It's 1947, and at this point, Austin has been living on his own there for about 14 years. A Saturday morning, bright, a slight chill. The line stretches along the narrow sidewalk. Women in their floral skirts of rust, lime, black, shifting weight, hips thrust out. A sigh and slump against the brick wall. People hear about it at market stalls. Word spreads through women's whispered conversations. The maids of Mexico City. A secret shared. He can fix anything, they say. These Russians, from such cold climates, it's good for the brain, makes it exact and precise like ice. It's in them. These Saturdays are Austin's busiest days. The whole street has a different feel. People walking, returning from the markets with their purchases, straw bags laden with avocados, mangoes. There are chickens, feet tied with red string. Cake boxes, hat boxes too. The schoolboys are on the corner, kicking a soccer ball back and forth. The older ladies who gather each morning in the park across the street are joined now by grandchildren, plump hands reaching for a slice of peach, struggling to get a grasp of park bench. The cars glide by with a serene patience, where there's little traffic. The maids of Mexico City, rising early, are either dispirited and gloomy or relieved, but several wait in line. Already the sun is strong, even for a January morning. He will move inside to his shop soon. But in these mid-morning hours, he likes to work outside, a table placed on the sidewalk, the surface of it littered with broken remnants. A wind-up alarm clock, a watch, its face shattered, a knotted silver chain, a clip-on earring, clasp loose, a pocket watch, an egg timer, these objects of the everyday, gadgets of life and small hours. A cardboard tag is tied to each with twine. Maria, 12 p.m. Constantina, 12:30 p.m. The tags read. A powder blue telephone hangs off the edge of the table, its receiver dangling above an old cash register. Silver keys like sparks in the noon sunlight. His hand aches. The palm holds a dull throbbing, and as he works he pauses, setting down the wrench, screwdriver to knead his tired tendons, the smashed nail bed of his thumb. Still, he likes the feel of the tools in his hands, his mind following the logic and mechanics, what bolt needs tightening, what hinge needs loosening to create the correct torque. The sun now shines down the middle of the street, shadows underfoot. Austin scans the line, women checking, watches, talking. Some stand with arms crossed, bags dangling off a wrist or shoulder. One woman bites her nails. Another opens and closes the clasp of her purse. All are in haste, eager to finish this one of many errands before launching on to the next task and the one after that. The radio is broken, a woman says, setting her bag on the table. He looks to her, then to the radio. You see the knob, the tuner here, it just spins round and round, she explains. You use it often? He turns the radio over in his hands. Does that matter? She says. Not really, he shrugs. But usually a woman knows how often the things she owns are used. He does not look at her when he speaks. He keeps his eyes on his hands. A woman, but not this woman. Every day, he looks at his nails filled with grime, grease. He is suddenly ashamed of his own deformed thumb. I couldn't say. If I had such a fine radio, I'd use it every day. Can it be fixed? One can tell a lot about a household from the use of its radio, he says, taking a screwdriver from his back pocket, unfastening the back plate. Can it be fixed? Your name? What? I will need your name for pickup. It can be fixed then. Yes, in just a few hours. Tell me your name first. My name? He looks to her now. Yes, you asked for my name, I ask for yours. There is defiance in her stance, her shoulders set square with a slight lean forward. Austin Alexandrovich Voronkov, he says, his eyes back to the radio. Your name is as long as a Mexican's, she gives a little laugh. Is that so? And you are, he says, his eyes meeting hers, which are round and large, nearly black. She's very beautiful, dark hair, like the smooth gloss of a black Cadillac, the eyes intense and eager in their deep hollows. Anna Rose Luisa de Soto. Done in an hour, he says, brusque, in no mood for pleasantries, the sting of the consulate's rejection still so fresh. These past few days, he'd felt the world itself was closing in on him, his sight lines narrowing to his very feet, one foot in front of the other. These repairs, simply a trade by chance. He falling through positions, stations in life, engineer, inventor, repairman. When he lines them up, thinks of the transitions from one to the next, it is enough to cause vertigo. But he can remember how easily all this began. A Kodak camera, next a transistor radio, then a fan. Several fans, left overnight like offerings placed at an altar. Though the altar was merely Austin's boarding house room door, 5 to 6 fans lined up like retired airplanes, the steady cross breeze from the hallway windows, enough to spur a lazy rotation of the opaque charcoal or iron blue propellers. He sets the radio to the side, writing Anna Rose on a piece of cardboard. When he looks up, she is gone. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matthew Thomas. I wrote We Are Not Ourselves. I want to echo a couple things I've heard. I'm honored to be here, and I'm also really greatly relieved to be done with this book. Smith mentioned that a couple of beers from now he might be able to relax. We all went out for some drinks beforehand, and so I am already 2 beers in, two stiff German beers. So I want to say, Mr. Henderson, I salute you that it takes 4 beers for you to relax. My book was edited by the great Mary Cerrucci at Simon & Schuster. I'm going to read a little section that's topical insofar as it's seasonal. These 2 main characters go to see the windows on Fifth Avenue. Eileen, born Tumulty, becomes Eileen Leary, has had an experience in her early youth with her alcoholic mother, who has managed to bring her out to see these windows despite being in the throes of her addiction, and has given her a wonderful day and a great memory. And Eileen has tried to replicate that every year if she can. In December of 1970, she headed to the city with Ed to see the window displays on Fifth Avenue. She was excited to see them, despite how corrosively ironic Ed had been about them the year before, when at one point in his Jeremiah Ed, he'd called them altars to consumer excess. She wasn't about to let his grousing spoil her enjoyment of a tradition she'd observed whenever she could since she'd first gone with her mother as an 11-year-old. Ed refused to pay for a parking garage. It took them half an hour to find a spot, and they ended up on 25th and 7th, almost a mile from Lord & Taylor. He refused to let them take a cab, even though she was wearing heels and it was 20 degrees out, with a wind that whipped up the avenue. The sun was setting, and store gates were being pulled down as if in protest of the cold. The sidewalks of 7th Avenue were unusually empty. She noticed that most of the cabs that passed were occupied. As they neared the store, the sidewalks grew more crowded, the bells of the Salvation Army collectors jingling on each corner. They saw a pack gathered in front, which quickened her step and made Ed sigh and slow down. She had been delighting in the scene of a golden retriever pulling at the corner of a wrapped gift when Ed, who had been munching his way through toward the bottom of a little bag of roasted nuts, broke the spell. "These things seem here for the purpose of entertainment," he said, "but really they're here to get you to come in and part with your money." He spoke in a breezy, careless way that suggested he believed a new understanding had sprung up between them. They're like organisms that have evolved elaborate decorative mechanisms to lure you in. People fall for it. It's fascinating, actually. Listen to yourself. The bee orchid, for instance, has flowers that look like female wasps. Males try to mate with it, and in the process they get pollen on their feet and spread it around. It's not about the window. It's about pulling you into the store. It's about getting you to leave with something. She was attempting to concentrate on the little animatronic girl whose hand was traveling slowly to cover her mouth, which had fallen open at the sight of Santa Claus's ebony boots disappearing up the chimney. It's a stupefying, hypnotic loop. It puts you in a suggestible state. Do you have to be so heady about everything? Do you have to analyze everything to death? What's amazing is that they're exactly the same every year. That's an ignorant remark, she spat. They're not the same at all. They put a lot of work into these, months of planning. She wouldn't have minded his objections so much if he hadn't insisted on drawing her into a dialogue about them. Was it too much to ask to share a moment of joy? She looked around at the other husbands. They didn't look any happier to be there. But they stood back dully, hands folded behind them or scratching their noses. They couldn't have been as cleverly cruel about it as Ed if they tried. And the battling of tourists, he said, every year it gets worse. The jostling, the jockeying for position. They're descending on the imperial city for their bread and circuses. I wish we didn't have to do this. She started walking to the train. A couple passing in the other direction gave her curious looks as though they could see the intensity of her disgust in her expression. She found herself unaccountably smiling at one man, giving him a manic sort of grin, full of the slightly breathless ecstasy of being unmoored. And he returned it with a delighted blush. By the time she felt a tug on her elbow, she was at the next corner. Don't be hysterical, Ed said. I was just making a few observations. The world isn't a lab. Come on, he said. Let's go back and look. In his worn jacket with the frayed sleeve ends, he looked like a war veteran about to ask for change for the subway. You've ruined it. Don't say that. Listen, I can't help myself sometimes. I don't know what's wrong with me. I do, she said. You didn't have enough fun as a kid. He pulled her arm, but she wouldn't budge. She watched steam rise from a manhole cover and felt in her chest the rumbling of a passing bus. She was keenly aware of the limits of the physical world. She wanted to be in one of those scenes in the windows, frozen in time, in the faultless harmony of parts working in concert, fulfilling the plan of a guiding, designing hand. It would be lovely not to have to make every decision in life, to be part of a spectacle brought out once a year for the safest of seasons and put to work amusing people who stared back in mute appreciation. The real world was so messy, the light imperfect, the paint chipped, the happiness only partial. One of these years, she said, we will come here and you will enjoy it and not make me feel miserable about it. I dream of that. Let's let that be this year, he said. Let's go back and look at those windows. Please, honey, let me make it up to you. It's too late, she said. It's never too late, he said. Don't say that. She hadn't been looking at him. Now she stopped to. Streams of people flowed past in either direction, rushing toward obscure destinations. This was her life right here, petty as it seemed at the moment. And this was the man she'd chosen to spend it with. He was holding his hat in his hand as if he'd taken it off for the purpose of beseeching her, and she saw that he would always have flaws, that he would always be a little too intense in his objections, a little too unbending when it came to the decadence of the world. She thought, we can't all wear a hair shirt all the time. But there he was, trying to pull her back to that scene he despised, and she saw that he couldn't live in a way other than the one he thought was right, and when he saw what the right thing was, like now, he cared about it as if it were the only thing that mattered. Everyone else around seemed as insubstantial as the air they moved through, the shopping bags they carried, the only things anchoring them to the ground. Did I tell you I love what you did with your hair, he said, and she let herself be mollified, because she thought he hadn't noticed. She took his hand. They retraced their steps, the street around them thronging with life. She saw that there was something perfect about the imperfection of her husband, her mortal, living husband with his excessive vigilance about the effects of capitalism and his unmistakable pair of bowed legs that she watched carry him forward. She kept her eyes on his shoes hitting the pavement and let him guide her wherever he was going.
I am Ted Thompson. This is my novel, Land of Steady Habits. It was published by Little Brown. And my editor is the wonderful Reagan Arthur. I'm going to read from a section that's about 10 pages into this book. It's a scene in which this character has arrived, it's also seasonal actually, he's arrived at a Christmas party and realized that he's surrounded by his ex-wife's friends. And so he escapes to the back deck, hoping to make it to his car before anyone notices. When he'd closed the door behind him, he heard giggles from beneath the deck and an urgent whisper, "Guys, someone's here," followed by a waft of reefer so potent it nearly made his eyes water. The boys held their hands behind their backs and pretended to be cool. "Yo," said one of the boys from the shadows, "what's going on?" "Just getting some fresh air, it's warm in there." They all nodded as if Anders had said something very wise. "What are you guys smoking?" They froze. One toed the gravel. "Relax, I'm not going to tell." "Seriously?" said the tall one in the middle. "Because if you're one of my dad's friends who he sent here to narc on me, then you can just go back and tell him that he's really predictable and sad, because we were just looking at the constellations." "Charlie?" There was a pause. "Who is that?" "It's Anders." The boy stepped forward from the shadows, squinting. "Christ. Look, don't worry, I'm not one of your dad's friends, first of all, and second of all," he couldn't think of a second of all. The first was true, and he had surprised himself with it. What else did this kid need to know? "Anyway," said Anders, "enjoy your constellations." "Wait, dude," said Charlie. "Come down here for a second." Anders went down the stairs and onto the dark packed dirt beneath the deck. The boys were taller than he'd thought, all of them meeting his eye. "You know me, but that's Arnie, and that's Gorbachev," he said, fiddling with something that looked like a small, deflated basketball. "So what do you mean you're not friends?" "I'm not. I mean, I was, and my wife is. Ex-wife, sorry. She's their friend. I can't stand them. Really, I find your parents unbearable." Charlie let out a laugh and went back to the thing in his hands, a mini pumpkin, it turned out. After a moment, he glanced up again. "Seriously?" Helene had met Sophie Ashby in a prenatal fitness class. 5 strangers in the shallow end at the Y doing a workout so low impact she called it manatee hour. When the babies came and Helene found herself with 2 tyrants in diapers and the demands of a career, it was Sophie who, according to Helene, kept her from losing her mind. By the time Charlie came along, 13 years after his sister Samantha, the children in the playgroup had retreated behind the closed doors of their bedrooms. All of the hand-me-downs long ago trickled their way to Nicaragua. Although everything about Charlie's birth appeared to be an accident, he was, in fact, a miracle of progesterone and planning, a little bundle of joy born to a woman of 44 and into her circle of friends. He was passed around for babysits. His bassinet was given a space at the table during dinner parties, where he was quiet and pleasant-smelling as a candle. When Samantha became Sam and buzzed her hair and had a bar jammed through the soft skin under her lower lip, Charlie was in the Cub Scouts with an adorable little neckerchief. And when Sam moved out to Seattle, always too poor or too busy to fly home, likely a lesbian, even more likely a vegan, her only regular communication with her family, the poorly copied issues of a magazine she'd created, a jumble of cartoons and words that bled right off the page that neither Mitchell nor Sophie could make any sense of, Charlie would sit on the sofa in the living room and regale their dinner guests with an impersonation of his gym teacher, his legs crossed exactly like his dad's. "You know how to rip one of these?" he said, holding up the pumpkin. There was a Bic pen jammed into the side of it, and a trough hollowed out of the top that he'd filled with pot. "I don't even know what that is." "This," he said, "is resourceful." It was hard to describe the efficiency of what followed. The hurricane of drug that entered his lungs, or the brutal eruption of coughing that ensued. But by the time he'd pulled himself together, the boys had all cracked wide, knowing grins. "How's the party upstairs?" Charlie asked, blowing a hit casually out of the corner of his mouth. "Real rager?" Anders liked Charlie. He was a smart kid. He was hilarious. "How are you feeling, Anders?" "I feel great, joyful, and sad. So sad. Jesus, sadder than I've ever felt before." "Yeah," said Charlie. "This grass is serious," said Anders. "Nah," he said, "that's the PCP." They all nodded, somber themselves. "Wait, what?" said Anders. Charlie blinked at him with yellow, roomy eyes. "We just smoke PCP?" Charlie shrugged. "We don't technically know what it is. It's more of a blend." Anders wasn't even sure exactly what PCP was, though he knew it was serious and likely addictive, which made him more distraught, seeing himself for a moment spending Christmas at the men's shelter, waiting in line with his cafeteria tray for a processed turkey dinner served to him sympathetically by Helene's community-minded friends. I have to get back to the party." "Have at it," said Charlie. Reaching the top of the deck stairs, Anders realized why he had come. It wasn't, of course, to interact with these people. but to see Helene, to talk privately with her about the party, about his isolation, to come clean about his lie about the house and tell her about the stupid thing he'd just done. Looking through the sliding glass doors, he surveyed the party, the clumps of people and their muted conversations, all men without suit coats and women in wool, searching for Helene, whom he found standing tall and proud with a glass of red. It was somewhere into his third stride that he thought he saw what he hoped he wouldn't, and what even a few hours before he'd thought was hugely improbable, when he'd put on his first dry-cleaned shirt in 6 months and slapped some spicy stuff on his neck, and had a moment of panic that Helene might have a date with her. Inside, she was chatting politely with a stranger, nodding and smiling, the fingers of her right hand interlaced with the fingers of the man's next to her, Anders' mother's emerald ring protruding from that mess of fingers like a piece of costume jewelry. Earlier that week, they'd had lunch in the back of a health food store, behind aisles of puffed wheat and earth-scented vitamins, where you could sit at a thick country table and talk beneath the fluttering of Chopin for hours. It was there that Anders had first wanted to express his regret, where he'd wanted to tell her about the hours of CNBC he now watched, or about how much he looked forward to the mail, or about how he was thrilled the other morning to wake up and discover he had run out of cranberry juice, which meant he could make a trip to the store, which meant his morning had purpose. He'd wanted to tell her this, and about how terrified he was that he'd made the wrong decision. The life he'd had before, the one he'd rejected so vehemently, the one he'd rushed to get out of after he'd decided it was them, his family, his children, his wife who were making him so miserable. It was their problem, not his, and if he could just get himself alone, away from all their demands and his absurd sense of duty, then he would be okay. That life, he'd wanted to tell her, was in fact the one for him. But when he'd asked her out of courtesy how she was, she lit up with a mouthful of tuna salad and told him how happy she was, how at first she didn't think she'd ever get through it, but now the divorce and the lawyers and the moving trucks and the boxes of anniversary gifts all seemed so far away. And she thought she finally got it, that Anders may have been right all along, that the divorce was what was best for both of them. He'd thought about asking her then, if she'd met someone, but all of this had come at him so quickly and so unexpectedly that all he could do was force a smile, finish his old-time seltzer, and tell her how happy he was for her. Thank you.
I just had this terrifying idea that I'd look out and see a bunch of my ex-wife's friends. I'm really grateful to see all of you all instead, and to be able to hear everybody else read. It's amazing. And so I'm going to read from my novel, The Great Glass Sea. It's published by Grove Press and edited by the wonderful Elizabeth Schmitz. And I'm just going to read from the beginning. It's about, it springs from Russian fables and is set in an alternative present up north in the far north of Russia. But at heart, it's essentially a love story between two brothers trying to hold on to the love for each other as the world tries to pull them apart. So I'll read from the very beginning, which is about them when they're kids. Always the island had been out there, so far out over so much choppy water. Far beyond the last gray wave, the groaning ice when there was ice, the fog when there was fog. So distant in the middle of such a huge lake that for their first 9 years, Niji, that church made of those tens of thousands of wooden pegs, each one as small as a little boy's finger bones, those wood-shingled domes like tops upended to spin their points on the floor of the sky, the priests' black robes snapping in the wind, their beards blowing with the clouds, their droning ceaseless as the shore slapped waves, might have been just another fairy tale that Dядя Avia told. And then one day, when the lake ice had broken and geese had come again, two brothers, twins, stole a little boat and rowed together out towards Niji. Into the lake, Dima said. To hunt the Chudo-Yudo, Yarek said. Until they found it, Dima said, and killed it, Yarek said. They were 10 years old, Dmitry Lvovich Zhuvov and Yaroslav Lvovich Zhuvov. And they'd never been this far out in the lake, this lost, this on their own. Around them, the water was wide as a second sky, darkening beneath the one above, the rowboat a moon sliver winking on the waves. In it, they sat side by side, hands buried in the pockets of their coats, leaning slightly into each other with each sway of the skiff. Or maybe it came up, Dima said, and crushed the boat, and they drowned, Yark said. Or Dima said it ate them. They grinned, the same grin at the same time, as if one's cheeks tugged the other's lips. Or Yark started and Dima finished. They died. They went quiet. The low slap of lake water knocking the metal hull. The small sharp calls of Jaeger's black specks swirling against a frostbitten sky. But no wood blades clacking at the rowboat's side. No worn handles creaking in the locks. Hours ago they had lost the oars. Now they were losing last light. Their boat had drifted so far into Lake Otsieva's center that they could no longer make out the shore, but there was the island. All their lives it had been somewhere beyond the edge of sight, and now they watched it, far gray glimpse growing darker as if the roots of its unknown woods were drawing night up from the earth. It humped blackly out of the distant water, unreachable as a whale's back, and beyond it stretched the lake, and all around the lake, and beneath them the rocking of its waves. At their feet, the tools they'd taken scraped back and forth against the skiff floor, axe, hatchet, cleaver, pick, each one freshly sharpened. In the bow, behind their backs, a brush hook's moon-bright blade swayed against the sky, beneath it a cloud of netting, and nestled there to keep from breaking, wrapped in wool blankets to warm the life in them, 24 eggs, a gestating nestful of yolky souls. Out of the stern, the fishing rod jutted, its line lipped by the waves, tugged and slacked, going down, down, down into the black belly of the lake, where its huge hook hung, gripping in its barb the red fist of a fresh goose heart. Way out over the water, far beyond the island, the edge of the lake met the end of the world, and there the sky was a thin red line drawn by a bead of blood. Then it was just a line. Then the line was gone, and there was just the darkness of the earth meeting the darkness of the sky, and the boys rose unsteadily on the unsteady boat and crouched atop the netting, unfolding the blankets from the eggs. Dima unscrewed the tops from the canning jars. Yark cracked the shells against their rims. One by one, he slid in each yolk on its slip of albumin. One by one, Dima closed the tops again. When they had all the eggs in all the jars, they tied threads around the glass necks. Each thread they tied to an oarlock, or a hole punched through the gunwale, or a ring at the prow, the two brothers crawling around the boat, reaching over its edge, letting go the jars. At the end of their strings, they floated the glass, gleaming the eggs like a lake full of eyes. How many heads do you think it has? Dima said. It had become more night than dusk, and there was no moon, no way to see the fishing line, but they watched the rod. At least 6, Yark said. Probably 12, Dima said. Yark told him 24. Dima said, I want the axe. Reaching down, he found it, and arms thin as the handle, shoulders straining, lifted. Beside him in Yark's small boy's hands, their old uncle's pistol seemed huge. They sat huddled together, cold and silent, and knowing the other was scared, the line would snap tight, the boat would jerk, the weight would suck down the stern, the water would wolf their feet, the thing's 24 heads would roar up around the boat, one set of jaws mouthing blood and metal, the other 23 agape, their tongues, their teeth. What if it doesn't come? Dima said. That was when the rod bent. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tiffany Anik. My novel is called Land of Love and Drowning. It was ushered into the world by the wonderful Sarah McGrath and Sarah Stein. I've lost my voice, so I hope you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me in the back? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thank you to the Center for Fiction for honoring all of us, especially in the beginning of our fiction careers. It's so important that you've validated our lives. Thank you for that. Thank you to my students who are here. You guys are fucking awesome. Right now in the United States, it seems that we're having some trouble figuring out how to validate the lives of our fellow Americans, maybe particularly Americans of color, Americans who find themselves to be young and black here in this country. And my novel is in large part about an entire people, the people of the Virgin Islands, who become Americans in body overnight, when in 1917, the United States buys the Virgin Islands from Denmark. And my novel sort of takes us through how these people who are now American citizens become American emotionally and psychologically. I think that's probably a never-ending journey. I'm just going to read from the beginning. Owen Arthur Bradshaw watched as the little girl was tied up with lace and silk. He jostled the warm rum in his glass and listened to the wind. The storm outside wasn't a hurricane, just a tropical gale. It was the season for storms. Lightning slated through the heavy wooden shutters that were closed but unfastened. The thunder was coming through the walls built with blue bitch stone. There was no one outside walking in the rain. That sort of thing was avoided. A scientist visiting from America had brought the lace and the silk. They were all at the house of Mr. Lovencrantz, an eminent Danish businessman. Denmark was giving up on the West Indies and America was buying in, but Mr. Lovencrantz was not leaving. The scientist was tying the girl up. He was demonstrating an experiment that had become stale on the continent, an experiment of electricity. The little girl was very beautiful, and she was very brave, and she was very afraid. She was also incredibly small. Captain Bradshaw thought on his daughter Iona, who was not unlike this American girl. Only Iona was more beautiful and equally as brave. The people who had come together to make Captain Owen Arthur Bradshaw could be traced back to West Africans forced to these islands as slaves, and West Africans who came over free to offer their services as goldsmiths, back to European men who were kicked out of Europe as criminals, and to European women of aristocratic blood who sailed to the islands for adventure, back to Asians who came as servants and planned to return to their Indies, and to Asians who only wanted to see if there was indeed a western side of the Indies, and to Caribs who sat quietly making baskets in the countryside, plotting ways to kill all the rest and take back the land that their God had granted them for a millennium. Owen Arthur had been raised from a poor upbringing to a place of importance and ownership. He was the captain and owner of a cargo ship, and now he was among the important men who sat in this living room and watched through the haze of the oil lamps as a girl was hoisted off the ground via lace and silk and a hook in the ceiling. The little girl's body jerked as the American scientist tugged. Her body jerked until she was a few feet off the ground, but she did not cry out. Owen Arthur Bradshaw was not sure how much longer he could bear to watch, but it was essential for him to be at this gathering. The host, Mr. Lovencrantz, was a rum maker, and Owen Arthur had always shipped rum. But with Americanness would come prohibition, and Owen Arthur needed to ensure he was included in any of Lovencrantz's non-liquor endeavors. He pressed his own earlobe between his thumb and forefinger. Success and solvency should have been on his mind, but Owen Arthur could not help but watch this American girl with a father's tenderness. This little girl was pale-faced and blonde, and Owen's little girl, Iona, was honey-skinned and ocean-haired. But still, he looked at this strange little girl as though looking on his own child. The first half of him desired that he had created this girl. She was a pretty yellow thing. The lower half of him desired the girl. How young could she be? He put his mouth to his glass and tilted it until the warm sweetness met his lips. She will outlive me, he thought to himself. And who was the she he was referring to? Perhaps his wife, who was just then sitting at home doing the sewing it seemed God had created her to do. Or perhaps he was speaking of his mistress, who was at that moment sitting in her home playing the piano he had bought her, making a music that only God or the devil could bless. Or perhaps he was actually speaking of his daughter, whom he loved like he loved his own skin. Perhaps he was speaking of the little girl to whom the scientist was now attaching cords of metal. Perhaps this little girl was, in a way, all woman to him, as all women might be to a certain kind of man. Owen Arthur is right. All these she's will outlive him, though he cannot bear the thought of his women going on. He knows his daughter will live forever in the way all parents do, simply because parents generally die first. But Owen Arthur will not die of old age. Owen Arthur will die of love. The Danish West Indies will become the United States Virgin Islands, and then this patriarch will die. And perhaps these things are the same thing. Behold, the American is saying in his strange accent. He hands the girl the glass ball and then he whispers to her, "Do not drop it or I will punish you." She does not make a move to suggest she has heard. She only takes the glass ball in both her hands, and then the first miracle happens. Her hair begins to rise. The storm outside begins to howl. Christ, have mercy. This is what the Christians whisper. The Jewish and Muslim men for whom these islands have been a refuge, Mata'oi, Katinu, and Allah Akbar, under their breaths respectfully. Yes, America will bring us progress. Here is progress before us. Lightning claws through the window as though hunting, and Owen Arthur watches the girl's hair rise toward the ceiling until it is sticking up like so many angel horns. Oh, the stories these men will tell of this night, how they will embellish one part, shrink the other, how they will make this night real again and again, some in Arabic, or Danish, or Yiddish, or English, others in that Caribbean language that tourist guidebooks will call Creole. The story will become more real than the night itself, because the story of it will last, while this wet night will soon be over. And here we all are, putting it down, so that it may last forever. Thank you.